Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Part 2, Chapter 5. The Ferryman. I want to remain by this river, thought Siddhartha. It is the same one that I crossed while going to the child people. A friendly ferryman ferried me then. I will go to him. From his hut my way once led me to a new life, which has now grown old and died. May my new way, my new life, start out from there. Tenderly he gazed at the streaming water, at the transparent green, at the crystalline lines of its mysterious pattern. He saw bright beads rising from the depths, silent bubbles drifting on the surface, sky blue reflected there. The river gazed at him with 1,000 eyes, with green, with white, with crystalline, with sky blue eyes. How he loved the water, how it delighted him, how grateful he was to it. In his heart he heard the voice speaking, the newly awakened voice, and it said to him, "Love this water, stay with it, learn from it." Oh yes, he wanted to learn from it, he wanted to listen to it. The man who grasped this water and its secrets, so it seemed, would also grasp a lot of other things, many secrets, all secrets. But of the secrets of the river, he saw only one today. It seized his soul. He saw the water running and running, constantly running, and yet it was always there, was always and forever the same, and yet every new instant. Who could grasp this? Who could fathom this? He did not grasp or fathom it. He felt only an inkling stirring, a distant memory, godly voices. Siddhartha stood up. Unbearable was the roiling of the hunger in his body. Suffering, he wandered farther along the bank, upstream, listened to the current, listened to the growling hunger in his body. When he reached the ferry, the boat was ready, and the same ferryman who had once ferried the young Samana across the river was standing in the boat. Siddhartha recognized him. He too had aged greatly. "Will you ferry me across?" he asked. The ferryman, astonished at seeing such a noble person wandering alone and on foot, took him into the boat and pushed off. "You have chosen a lovely life," said the passenger. "It must be lovely to live by this water every day and to travel upon it." Smiling, the rower rocked. "It is lovely, sir. It is as you say. But it is not every life. Is not every work lovely?" "That may be, but I envy you for yours." "Ah, you might soon stop enjoying it. It is nothing for people in fine clothes." Siddhartha laughed. "I have already been eyed once today because of my clothes, eyed with distrust. Ferryman, would you not like to accept these clothes, which are a burden to me? For you must know I have no money to pay you the fare." "You are joking, sir," the ferryman laughed. "I am not joking, my friend. Listen, you once ferried me across this water for charity's sake. So do it again today, and take my clothes as your fare." "And do you wish to travel on without clothes, sir?" "I would rather not travel farther at all. I would rather you gave me an old apron, ferryman, and kept me on as your assistant, or, more precisely, as your apprentice, for first I must learn how to handle the boat." For a long time the ferryman gazed at the stranger, seeking. "Now I recognize you," he finally said. "You once slept in my hut. That was long ago. It must have been more than 20 years ago, and I ferried you across the river, and we said goodbye as good friends. Were you not a Samana? I no longer remember your name." "My name is Siddhartha, and I was a Samana when you last saw me." "Then welcome, Siddhartha. My name is Vasudeva. You will, I hope, be my guest again today and sleep in my hut, and tell me where you come from and why your lovely clothes are such a burden to you." They had reached the middle of the river, and Vasudeva rowed harder to buck the current. He labored calmly, with powerful arms, his eyes on the tip of the boat. Siddhartha sat and watched him, and remembered that once, on that last day of his Samana period, love for this man had stirred in his heart. Gratefully he accepted Vasudeva's invitation. When they moored on the bank, he helped him bind the boat to the posts. Then the ferryman asked him into his hut, offered him bread and water, and Siddhartha ate with gusto, and also ate with gusto from the mangoes that Vasudeva offered him. Then, as the sun was about to go down, they settled at a tree trunk on the bank, and Siddhartha told the ferryman about his background, about his life, and how today, in that hour of despair, he had seen it pass before his eyes. He talked until deep into the night. Vasudeva listened very attentively. Listening, he absorbed everything, origin and childhood, all the learning, all the seeking, all joy, all woe. One of the ferryman's greatest virtues was that he knew how to listen like few other people. Without a word from Vasudeva, the speaker felt that the ferryman took in his words, silent, open, waiting, missing none, impatient for none, neither praising nor blaming, but only listening. Siddhartha felt what happiness is to unburden himself to such a listener, to sink his own life into this listener's heart, his own seeking, his own suffering. But toward the end of Siddhartha's story, when he spoke about the tree by the river and about his deep despair, about the sacred Om, and of how after his long slumber he had felt such deep love for the river, the ferryman listened twice as hard, utterly and thoroughly devoted, with eyes closed. When Siddhartha fell silent, there was a long stillness, and then Vasudeva said, "It is as I thought. The river spoke to you. It is your friend too. It speaks to you too. That is good. That is very good. Stay with me, Siddhartha, my friend. I once had a wife. Her pallet was next to mine, but she died long ago. I have long lived alone. Live with me now. There is room and food for both of us." "I thank you," said Siddhartha. "I thank you and accept. And I also thank you, Vasudeva, for listening to me so well. Rare are the people who know how to listen, and I have never met anyone who knew it so well as you. This too I will learn from you." "You will learn it," said Vasudeva, "but not from me. It was the river that taught me how to listen. You too will learn how from the river. The river knows everything. One can learn everything from it. Look, you too have already learned from the river that it is good to strive downward, to sink, to seek the depth. The rich and noble Siddhartha is becoming an oarsman. The learned Brahmin Siddhartha is becoming a ferryman. This too was told to you by the river. You will learn the other thing from the river too." Siddhartha said, after a long pause, "What other thing, Vasudeva?" Vasudeva stood up. "It is late," he said. "Let us go to bed. I cannot tell you what the other thing is, my friend. You will learn it. Perhaps you know it already. Look, I am no scholar. I do not know how to speak, nor do I understand how to think. I only know how to listen and to be pious, and that is all I have ever learned. If I could talk and teach, I might be a sage, but I am only a ferryman, and my task is to ferry people across this river. I have ferried many across, thousands, and for all of them my river has been nothing but a hindrance in their travels. They traveled for money and business, to weddings and on pilgrimages, and the river was in their way, and the ferryman was there to get them swiftly across that hindrance. But for few among the thousands, very few, 4 or 5, the river was no hindrance. They heard its voice, they listened to it, and the river became sacred for them, as it is for me. Let us now retire for the night, Siddhartha." Siddhartha remained with the ferryman and learned how to handle the boat, and when there was no ferrying to do, he worked with Vasudeva in the rice paddy, gathered wood, picked the fruit of the pisang trees. He learned how to make an oar, and learned how to repair the boat, and weave baskets, and was cheerful about everything he learned, and the days and months ran swiftly by. But more than Vasudeva could teach him, the river taught him. He learned incessantly from the river. Above all, it taught him how to listen with a silent heart, with a waiting, open soul, without passion, without desire, without judgment, without opinion. He lived amiably next to Vasudeva, and at times they exchanged words, few and long-pondered words. Vasudeva was no friend of words. Siddhartha could seldom get him to speak. "Did the river," he once asked, "also teach you this secret, that time does not exist?" Vasudeva's face lit up with a bright smile. "Yes, Siddhartha," he said. "Is this what you mean? That the river is everywhere at once, at its source and at its mouth, at the waterfall, at the ferry, at the rapids, in the sea, in the mountains, everywhere at once, and only the present exists for it, and not the shadow of the future?" "That is it," said Siddhartha. "And when I learned that, I looked at my life, and it was also a river. And the boy Siddhartha was separated from the adult Siddhartha, and from the old man Siddhartha only by shadow, not by substance. Nor were Siddhartha's earlier births the past, and his death and his return to Brahma are no future. Nothing was, nothing will be. Everything is, everything has being and is present." Siddhartha spoke ecstatically. This illumination had made him deeply blissful. Oh, were not all sufferings time? Were not all fear and self-torment time? Were not all difficulty, all hostility in the world over and overcome as soon as time was overcome, as soon as time could be thawed away? He had spoken ecstatically. Vasudeva smiled and beamed at him, and nodded in confirmation. He nodded silently, ran his hand over Siddhartha's shoulder, and went back to his work. And once again, when the river swelled in the rainy season and it was roaring mightily, Siddhartha said, "Is it not true, O friend, that the river has many voices, very many voices? Does it not have the voice of a king, and of a warrior, and of a bull, and of a night bird, and of a woman giving birth, and of a sighing man, and 1,000 other voices?" "It is so," nodded Vasudeva. "The voices of all creatures are in its voice." "And do you know," Siddhartha went on, "what word it speaks when you succeed in hearing all its 10,000 voices at once?" Vasudeva laughed happily. He leaned over to Siddhartha and spoke the sacred Om into his ear, and that was indeed what Siddhartha had heard. And little by little his smile grew more similar to the ferryman's, became almost as radiant, almost as blissful, likewise shining from 1,000 tiny creases, likewise a youngster's, likewise an oldster's. Many travellers who saw the two ferrymen thought they were brothers. On many evenings they sat together at the tree trunk by the bank, silently listening to the water, which was no water for them, but the voice of life, the voice of being, the voice of eternal becoming. And there were moments when both, while hearing the river, thought of the same things, of a conversation from 2 days ago, of one of their passengers whose face and fate occupied their minds, of death, of their childhoods, and both of them in the same moment, when the river had said something good to them, looked at each other, both thinking the exact same thoughts, both blissful at this same answer to the same question. Something emanated from the ferry and from the two ferrymen, something that some of the travellers sensed. Sometimes a traveller, after peering into the face of one ferryman, began to tell his life story, his suffering, confessed evil, requested comfort and advice. Sometimes a traveller asked for permission to spend an evening with them in order to listen to the river, and sometimes curious people would come, having been told that 2 sages or wizards or saints lived by this ferry. The curious asked many questions, but they received no answers, and they found neither wizards nor sages. They found only 2 old, friendly mannikins who seemed to be mute and somewhat strange and stupid. And the curious laughed and conversed about how foolishly and gullibly the populace spread such empty rumors. The years flowed away, and no one counted them. Then one day some monks came pilgriming, followers of Gautama, the Buddha, and they asked to be ferried across the river, and from them the ferrymen learned that they were hurrying back to their great teacher, for the news was spreading that the Sublime One was mortally ill, and would soon die his final human death in order to pass into redemption. Not long after that a new group of monks came pilgriming, and then another group, and both the monks and most of the other travellers and wanderers spoke of nothing but Gautama and his coming death. And just as people stream from everywhere and every place to a military expedition or to a royal coronation and gather in groups like ants, so too they streamed, as if drawn by magic, to where the great Buddha was awaiting his death, where the dreadful event was to occur, and the great perfect man of an aeon was to pass into glory. During this period Siddhartha thought a great deal about the dying sage, the great teacher, whose voice had admonished nations and awoken hundreds of thousands of people, whose voice he too had once heard, whose sacred face he too had once viewed with reverence. He thought about him lovingly, saw his path of perfection before his eyes, and smiled as he recalled the words that he, the young Siddhartha, had once addressed to him, the Sublime One. His words, it struck him, had been proud and precocious. He smiled as he recalled them. He knew long since that he was no longer separated from Gautama, whose teaching he had been unable to accept. No, a true seeker could accept no teaching if he truly wished to find. But the man who had found could approve of every single teaching, every way, every goal. Nothing separated him any longer from all the thousand others who lived in the eternal, who breathed the divine. On one of these days, when so many were pilgriming to the dying Buddha, Kamala also pilgrimed to him. She, once the most beautiful of courtesans, she had long since withdrawn from her earlier life, had given her garden to Gautama's monks, had taken refuge in the teaching, was one of the female friends and benefactresses of the pilgrims. Upon hearing the news of Gautama's coming death, she, together with the boy Siddhartha, her son, had set out on foot, in simple clothes. She was travelling along the river with her little boy. But soon the son grew tired. He wanted to go home. He wanted to rest, wanted to eat, grew sulky and whiny. Kamala had to rest with him often. He was used to getting his way with her. She had to feed him, had to comfort him, had to scold him. He did not understand why he and his mother had to go on this arduous and dismal pilgrimage to an unknown place, to a stranger who was holy and was dying. Let him die. How did it concern the boy? The pilgrims were not far from Vasudeva's ferry when little Siddhartha once again made his mother rest. She too, Kamala, was tired, and while the boy chewed on a banana, she squatted on the ground, closed her eyes a bit, and rested. But suddenly she uttered a lamenting shriek. The boy looked at her shocked, and saw that her face was pale with horror, and from under her dress slipped a black snake that had bitten Kamala. They both now hurried in order to find people, and they approached the ferry. There Kamala collapsed, unable to go on. The boy let out a pitiful cry, while kissing and hugging his mother, and she too joined in his loud cries for help, until the sounds reached Vasudeva's ears as he stood by the ferry. Quickly he came, took the woman in his arms, carried her to the boat. The boy ran along, and soon they all came to the hut, where Siddhartha stood at the hearth, lighting a fire. He looked up and saw, first, the boy's face, which strangely stirred his memory, recalled forgotten things. Then he saw Kamala, whom he instantly recognized, though she lay unconscious in the ferryman's arms, and now he knew that this was his own son, whose face had stirred such deep memories, and Siddhartha's heart beat in his breast. Kamala's wound was washed, but was already black, and her body was swollen. A healing potion was served to her. She awoke. She lay on Siddhartha's pallet in the hut, and Siddhartha, who once had loved her so, now stood leaning over her. It seemed to her like a dream. She smiled as she looked into the face of her friend. Only slowly did she realize where she was, remember the bite. She then called anxiously for the boy. "He is here. Do not worry," said Siddhartha. Kamala looked into his eyes. She spoke with a heavy tongue paralyzed by the poison. "You have grown old, my dear," she said. "You have grown grey, but you resemble the young Samana who once came into my garden without clothes and with dusty feet. You resemble him far more than you did when you left me and Kamaswami. Your eyes resemble his, Siddhartha. Ah, I too have grown old. Old. Did you recognize me all the same?" Siddhartha smiled. "I recognized you immediately, Kamala, my dear." Kamala nodded toward her boy and said, "Did you recognize him too? He is your son." Her eyes grew confused and they closed. The boy wept. Siddhartha took him on his lap, let him weep, caressed his hair, and as he looked at the boy's face, he thought of a Brahmin prayer he had once learned when he himself had been a little boy. Slowly, in a sing-song voice, he began to recite it. From his past and his childhood the words came flowing to him, and under his sing-song the boy grew calm, sobbed a little now and then, and fell asleep. Siddhartha put him on Vasudeva's pallet. Vasudeva stood at the hearth, cooking rice. Siddhartha glanced at him, and Vasudeva smiled back. "She is dying," said Siddhartha softly. Vasudeva nodded. The fiery glow from the hearth ran over his friendly face. Once again Kamala awoke. Pain twisted her face. Siddhartha's eyes read the suffering on her lips, on her pale cheeks. He read it silently, attentive, waiting, absorbed in her suffering. Kamala felt it. Her gaze sought his eyes. Looking at him, she said, "Now I see that your eyes have also changed. They are quite different now. So by what do I still recognize you as Siddhartha? You are Siddhartha, and are not." Siddhartha said nothing. His eyes gazed silently into hers. "You have attained it?" she asked. "You have found peace?" He smiled and placed his hand on hers. "I see it," she said. "I see it. I too will find peace." "You have found it," whispered Siddhartha. Kamala gazed steadily into his eyes. She recalled wanting to go on a pilgrimage to Gautama, to see the face of the perfect man, to breathe his peace, and now instead she had found Siddhartha, and that was good. It was just as good as if she had seen the other. She wanted to tell him, but her tongue no longer obeyed her will. Silently she looked at him, and he saw the light fading in her eyes. When the final pain filled her eyes and broke, when the final shudder ran through her limbs, his finger closed her lids. He sat and sat, gazing at her lifeless face. He gazed and gazed at her lips, her old, tired, pinched lips, and he remembered that once, in the springtime of his life, he had likened those lips to a freshly broken fig. He sat and sat, studying the pale face, the weary creases. He filled up with the sight, saw his own face lying like that, just as white, just as faded, and also saw his face and hers young, with red lips, with burning eyes, and the feeling of the present in simultaneity permeated him fully, the feeling of eternity. In this hour he felt deeply, more deeply than ever, the indestructibility of every life, the eternity of every instant. When he rose, Vasudeva had prepared rice for him, but Siddhartha did not eat. In the stable where their goat was, the two old men arranged a litter, and Vasudeva went to bed. But Siddhartha went out and sat in front of the hut all night, listening to the river awash with the past, touched and enfolded by all the times of his life at once. Sometimes he stood up, walked to the door of the hut, and listened to see if the boy was asleep. Early in the morning, before the sun was visible, Vasudeva came from the stable and went to his friend. "You have not slept?" he said. "No, Vasudeva. I sat here. I listened to the river. It told me a lot. It filled me deeply with the salutary thought, with the thought of the oneness." "You have experienced sorrow, Siddhartha, but I see that no sadness has entered your heart." "No, dear friend. Why should I be sad? I, who was rich and happy, have now become even richer and happier. I have been given my son." "Your son is welcome to me too. But now, Siddhartha, let us get to work. There is a lot to do. Kamala has died on the same pallet where once my wife died. Let us also build Kamala's funeral pyre on the same hill where I once built my wife's funeral pyre." While the boy slept on, they built the pyre.